Her son kicked this black woman out after she lost her job, unaware she had $14 million hidden. Enjoy the story. The rust-colored cardigan hung loose on Dorothy Wilson's shoulders as she stood at the bus stop, rain pelting against her worn leather shoes. Her fingers, calloused from decades of scrubbing floors and washing dishes, clutched the pink slip that had ended her 30-year career at Westfield Medical Center. The paper trembled in her grip, not from the cold Chicago wind, but from the weight of what awaited her at home. At 62, with arthritis creeping through her joints like slow poison, Dorothy straightened her spine and lifted her chin. The world had never been kind to her, but she had survived worse. She would survive. This too. When the bus finally arrived, Dorothy climbed aboard, her knees protesting with each step. She settled into a seat near the back, watching the city blur past the rain-streaked window. Fragments of her life flashed before her, the endless night, shifts, the missed recitals, the birthdays celebrated with store-bought cake at midnight when her son Robert was already asleep. Every sacrifice made for him, every dream deferred. And now this pink slip that felt like a sentence. The bus lurched to a stop 3 blocks from the modest 2-bedroom home where she lived with Robert and his wife, Cynthia. Dorothy had signed over the deed to them 5 years ago, when Robert insisted it would be better for tax purposes. Now, with each step toward the house, dread pooled in her stomach. The front door was unlocked, and she slipped inside, hoping to delay the inevitable conversation. "You're home early," Robert's voice cut through the silence. He sat at the kitchen table, his corporate suit perfectly pressed, his eyes cold as they fixed on the pink slip in her hand. "What's that?" Dorothy took a deep breath. "They're downsizing," she said quietly. "The hospital let go of all the cleaning staff over 60. Robert's expression hardened, his jaw tightening in a way that reminded Dorothy of his father, a man who had walked out when Robert was just 7, claiming he hadn't signed up to be poor. The resemblance sent a chill through her. "So what now?" he asked, not bothering to mask the irritation in his voice. "You're just going to sit around here, eat for free?" Each word was a needle, precise and painful. Dorothy remained standing, her back straight, despite the weight pressing down on her shoulders. "I'll find something else," she said, her voice steady even as her heart cracked. "I always do." Cynthia appeared in the doorway, her silk blouse worth more than Dorothy's entire wardrobe. Her eyes narrowed at the pink slip, then darted to Robert with a look that made Dorothy's skin crawl. "We can't afford dead weight around here," she said, the words dripping with disdain. "Maybe you should look into one of those nursing homes. They always need janitors." Dorothy stood silently, her face a mask of dignity that hid the storm raging within. These were the people she had sacrificed everything for, her youth, her health, her dreams, and they were looking at her like she was nothing more than a burden, a problem to be solved. "I think it's time we had a serious talk," Robert said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he used with difficult clients. "You're getting older, Mom. You need to be realistic about your situation." The word Mom sounded foreign on his lips, a formality rather than an endearment. Dorothy couldn't remember the last time he had called her that with warmth. She watched him exchange glances with Cynthia, a silent conversation flowing between them while she stood outside their circle, an intruder in what was once her own home. Robert cleared his throat. "We've been thinking it might be best if you found your own place, somewhere more suitable for someone in your position." Dorothy felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "My position? Unemployed, aging, limited, prospects." He listed these facts as if reading items off a grocery list, each one a verdict on her worth. "What your son is trying to say," Cynthia interjected, her voice honey-coated poison, "is that this arrangement isn't working anymore. We need our space, and you need to stand on your own feet." The irony was not lost on Dorothy. She had stood on her own feet for decades, breaking her back to put Robert through college, to give him opportunities she never had. And now, at the moment she finally needed support, they were cutting her loose. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Dorothy wanted to scream, to remind them of every sacrifice, every night she went hungry so Robert could have new shoes, every dream she buried so his could flourish. But she didn't. Instead, she nodded once, a single dignified acknowledgement. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'll pack my things." The surprise on their faces told her they had expected tears, begging, or anger. They hadn't expected this. Calm acceptance, this quiet dignity. It unsettled them, made them shift uncomfortably in their expensive clothes. In her small bedroom, Dorothy pulled out the weathered suitcase from under her bed, the same one she had brought to the hospital the night Robert was born. She packed methodically. 2 changes of clothes, her mother's Bible, the grey cardigan she wore when life got heavy. From beneath a loose floorboard, she retrieved a small wooden box containing her most precious possession, a sealed envelope given to her just a month ago by Mrs. Eleanor Harrington, the elderly woman she had cared for 3 days a week for the past 15 years. Mrs. Harrington, unlike her son, had seen Dorothy, truly seen her. In their final conversation before her passing, the old woman had pressed the envelope into Dorothy's hands with surprising strength. "Don't open this until you really need it," she had whispered. "Promise me, Dorothy." Dorothy had promised. And as she stood in the bedroom that would no longer be hers, holding the last of her possessions in a single suitcase, she knew that moment had arrived. She returned to the kitchen where Robert and Cynthia waited, their impatience barely concealed. "I'm ready," she said. Robert wouldn't meet her eyes as he handed her $300. "To help you get started," he said, as if this pittance could erase the debt he owed her. Dorothy accepted it without comment, tucking it into her purse alongside Mrs. Harrington's envelope. "I've called you a cab," Cynthia said, glancing at her watch. "It should be here any minute." Dorothy nodded, moved toward the door, then paused. She turned back to look at them, her son and the woman he had chosen, really look at them perhaps for the first time. What she saw broke her heart, but also strangely freed it. "I hope," she said softly, "that you never find yourselves in need of mercy." The cab was waiting at the curb. Dorothy didn't look back as the house disappeared behind her, the home she had scrubbed and polished, the place where she had raised her son alone after his father walked out. Instead, she directed the driver to the Lakeside Hotel, a modest but clean establishment near the water. In the privacy of her hotel room, Dorothy finally opened Mrs. Harrington's envelope. Inside were 3 items: a letter, a legal document, and a small key. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the letter first. "My dear Dorothy," it began in Mrs. Harrington's elegant script. "If you're reading this, I am gone, and you are in need. For 15 years, you have cared for me with dignity, respect, and love. Things my own children rarely showed me. You listened to my stories, laughed at my jokes, and made my final years worth living. While others saw an old woman, you saw a human being. This is a rare gift." Dorothy's vision blurred with tears as she continued reading. "What you don't know is that before my late husband passed, he made me promise to leave our fortune to someone worthy, not to our children, who visit only when they need money, but to someone who understands the value of kindness. Dorothy, I have watched you sacrifice everything for a son who takes you for granted. I have seen you work yourself to bone for people who don't know your name. It ends now." The legal document was a will, naming Dorothy as the sole beneficiary of Eleanor Harrington's estate. The key belonged to a safe deposit box at First Chicago Bank, containing access information to accounts totaling just over $14 million. Dorothy sat on the edge of the hotel bed, the papers trembling in her hands. $14 million. The number seemed impossible, disconnected from reality. More money than she could spend in 3 lifetimes. Her mind raced with the implications, the possibilities, the sheer improbability of it all. For a moment her thoughts turned to Robert, what this could mean for him, how it could change his life. But as quickly as the thought arose, it was replaced by the memory of his cold eyes, his cutting words. "We can't afford dead weight." Dorothy carefully folded the papers and tucked them back into the envelope. Tomorrow she would visit the bank. Tonight, she would allow herself to grieve, not for the job she had lost or the home she had been forced to leave, but for the love she had given so freely to a son who had never learned its value. In the morning, Dorothy dressed in her simple clothes, a navy blue dress she had worn to church for the past 5 years, her sensible shoes, the pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother. She looked ordinary, unremarkable, just another black woman of a certain age, invisible to most of society. It was the perfect disguise. At First Chicago Bank, the manager's eyes widened when she presented Mrs. Harrington's letter and the key. His entire demeanor shifted from polite disinterest to eager accommodation. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, the respect in his voice unfamiliar to her ears, "if you'll follow me, we can get everything set up for you right away." 2 hours later, Dorothy emerged from the bank with a new identity, wealthy woman. The accounts were now in her name. She had access to more money than she had earned in her entire life. Yet outwardly, nothing had changed. She was still Dorothy Wilson, still wearing her navy blue dress, still carrying her weathered purse. The power of her secret warmed her from within. Her first decision was simple: she would not rush. For decades, her life had been dictated by others' needs, others' emergencies, others' schedules. Now time was finally her own. She would use it wisely. She checked out of the hotel and rented a modest apartment with a view of Lake Michigan. For 2 weeks, she did little but sit by the window, watching the water change colors with the sky, thinking about what she wanted from the life that stretched before her, a life suddenly full of possibilities. On the 15th day, Dorothy called a car service and visited a luxury real estate office in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood. The receptionist looked her up and down, taking in her simple clothes and unassuming presence. "Can I help you?" she asked, skepticism evident in her tone. "I'm looking to purchase a home," Dorothy said quietly, "something overlooking the lake." The receptionist's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Our properties start at $2 million, she said, the message clear. "You don't belong here." Dorothy nodded. "That won't be a problem." Reluctantly, the woman summoned a realtor, a tall man named Richard, who barely concealed his impatience, as he showed Dorothy a lakefront property with soaring ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows. His condescension was palpable as he explained basic features as if speaking to a child. "I'll take it," Dorothy said when the tour was complete. Richard blinked, caught off guard. "This property is $3.6 million, he clarified, as if she hadn't understood. "I know," Dorothy replied calmly. "I'd like to pay in full." The change in his demeanor was immediate and dramatic. Suddenly, Dorothy was Mrs. Wilson, worthy of his attention, his respect, his time. She watched the transformation with a mixture of amusement and sadness, thinking of all the years she had been dismissed, overlooked, underestimated. Within a month, Dorothy had moved into her lakefront home. She furnished it simply but beautifully, with comfortable chairs positioned to capture the lake view, shelves filled with books she had always wanted to read but never had time for, a piano she was determined to learn to play. No crystal chandeliers or marble statues, just space, light, and peace. She hired a financial advisor who was initially skeptical of this unassuming black woman with extraordinary wealth, but who quickly learned to respect her sharp mind and careful questions. Together, they established a foundation focused on supporting domestic workers, providing healthcare, legal aid, and educational opportunities to those who, like Dorothy, had spent their lives caring for others' homes while struggling to secure their own. Life settled into a new rhythm. Dorothy volunteered at a community center, took piano lessons, planted a garden. She made friends, real friends who knew nothing of her wealth, but valued her wisdom, her kindness, her strength. For the first time in decades, she was living for herself, and the feeling was both foreign and exhilarating. 6 months passed before she encountered Robert again. It happened at Marshall Field's department store, where Dorothy was selecting a gift for her piano teacher. She was browsing scarves when she heard Cynthia's voice, brittle with tension. "We need to cut back on unnecessary expenses," she was saying to Robert as they rounded the corner. "Your bonus isn't—" They froze when they saw Dorothy. For a moment no one spoke. Dorothy took in her son's appearance, the shadows under his eyes, the strain around his mouth, the cheaper cut of his suit. Something had changed. Robert recovered. "First, Mum, he said, the word stiff on his tongue. You look... well. Dorothy nodded. I am well. Cynthia's eyes darted to Dorothy's shopping bags, her cashmere sweater, the subtle gold watch on her wrist. How you found a job, she said, making it half question, half accusation. No, Dorothy replied simply. The confusion on their faces might have been comical under different circumstances. Before they could question her further, a sales associate approached. Mrs. Wilson, your car service is waiting whenever you're ready. And Mr. Chen called from the gallery. The painting you admired is available if you'd like to purchase it. The associate withdrew, leaving Dorothy facing the naked shock on Robert and Cynthia's faces. Car service? Robert echoed. Gallery? Mom, what's going on? Dorothy looked at her son, really looked at him. The boy she had raised alone, the man who had discarded her when she became inconvenient. She felt no triumph in his obvious distress, only a deep, abiding sadness for what they had lost, what he had thrown away. Life changes, she said quietly. Sometimes in ways we don't expect. She turned to leave, but Robert grabbed her arm. Wait, he said, his voice urgent. We should talk, maybe over dinner, our treat. The desperation in his eyes told Dorothy everything she needed to know. This wasn't about reconciliation. It was about curiosity, about opportunity, about what she might be able to do for him. Gently, she removed his hand from her arm. I'm afraid I have plans, she said. Perhaps another time. As she walked away, she heard Cynthia's harsh whisper. Did you see her watch? That's a Cartier. Where did she get money for a Cartier? Dorothy smiled to herself, not slowing her pace. Let them wonder. Let them speculate. She had given them enough of her life already. In the following weeks, Robert called repeatedly, leaving increasingly desperate messages. The company he worked for was downsizing. He and Cynthia were struggling to make mortgage payments. Could they meet for lunch? Did she need help managing her finances? His concern, so transparently self-serving, saddened Dorothy but did not surprise her. She didn't return his calls. Instead, she focused on building the life she wanted, a life of purpose, connection, and joy. She started a book club at the community center, funded scholarships for the children of domestic workers, learned to play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata on her piano. She wore her natural grey curls with pride and dressed simply but well, comfortable in her own skin in a way she had never been before. The confrontation, when it finally came, was public and unexpected. Dorothy was attending a charity gala for the Chicago Children's Hospital when Robert and Cynthia appeared, clearly uninvited. They cornered her near the bar, Robert's face flushed, with anger and something like betrayal. You've been hiding money, he accused, loud enough to draw stares from nearby guests. All those years pretending to be broke, making me feel guilty for your sacrifices, and you had money stashed away. Dorothy maintained her composure, her voice low and steady. I never lied to you, Robert. Everything I ever told you was true. Then explain this, he demanded, gesturing wildly at her elegant black dress, the gala surrounding them. Explain how my mother, a hospital janitor, is suddenly living in a Gold Coast mansion and attending charity galas. The crowd around them had grown silent, watching the drama unfold. Dorothy was acutely aware of the eyes on her, the whispers behind hands. For a moment, she considered walking away, avoiding the scene Robert seemed determined to create. But something in her had changed. She was tired of silence, tired of hiding, tired of diminishing herself to make others comfortable. Your mother, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed room, received an inheritance from a woman who valued kindness over blood, a woman who saw me, really saw me, when her own children, like you, saw only what I could do. For them. Robert's face contorted with rage. That's not fair. I gave you a home. My home, Dorothy corrected him gently. The home I paid for, that I signed over to you because you convinced me it was the right thing to do. The home you evicted me from the moment I lost my job. Cynthia stepped forward, her face a mask of calculation. We were just concerned for your well-being, she said, her voice honey-sweet. We thought... No, Dorothy interrupted, a lifetime of deference falling away. You thought I had outlived my usefulness. You thought I was a burden. You never once asked if I was okay. If I had savings, if I had plans. You saw a black woman who had spent her life cleaning floors, and you assumed she had nothing else to offer. The truth hung in the air between them, undeniable and raw. Around them, the gala attendees, Chicago's elite, people who had spent their lives being served by women like Dorothy, shifted uncomfortably. "How much?" Robert finally asked, his voice cracking. "How much did this woman leave you?" Dorothy looked at her son, at the naked greed in his eyes, and made a decision. "Enough," she said simply, "enough to never need you again." She turned to leave, but Robert grabbed her arm, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "You owe me," he hissed. "Everything you did, you were supposed to do that. You were my mother." A security guard stepped forward, but Dorothy raised a hand to stop him. She looked directly into her son's eyes, seeing not the man before her but the baby she had found abandoned behind a dumpster 35 years ago, sick and fragile, wrapped in a dirty blanket. "I chose to be your mother," she said quietly. The words meant only for him. "I found you behind St. Mary's Hospital when you were 3 days old. I was volunteering there, just 19 myself. You were so small, so sick. The police said you'd probably die before they found your birth mother. I couldn't let that happen." Robert's grip on her arm loosened as shock washed over his face. "What are you talking about?" "I adopted you," Dorothy continued, her voice steady, despite the pain radiating from her heart. "My boyfriend left when I refused to give you up. I raised you alone, worked 3 jobs sometimes to make sure you had everything you needed. Not because I had to, but because I chose to. Because from the moment I saw you, you were mine." The Kosti. Truth landed like a physical blow. Robert staggered back, his face ashen. Around them the crowd had grown, drawn by the raw emotion of the scene unfolding before them. Dorothy was vaguely aware of phones recording, of whispers spreading, but she kept her eyes on Robert. "You're lying," he whispered, but there was no conviction in his voice. "I have the adoption papers," Dorothy said gently. "I've always had them. I never showed them to you because I wanted you to feel chosen, not abandoned. I wanted you to know you were loved from the beginning." Tears streamed down Robert's face now, years of certainty crumbling around him. Cynthia stood frozen, beside him, her calculating eyes darting between them, recalibrating in light of this new information. "All this time," Robert said, his voice breaking, "all those sacrifices were made with love," Dorothy finished for him. "Real love doesn't calculate cost, it doesn't keep score, and it doesn't stop when circumstances change." She turned to leave, her heart heavy but her spine straight. As she walked through the crowd, a strange thing happened. People stepped aside, making way for her with a respect she had never before experienced. A few nodded, some even touched her arm gently as she passed. Not with pity, but with something like reverence. Outside, the night air was cool against her skin. Dorothy took a deep breath, feeling lighter than she had in years. The truth had finally been spoken, the silence broken. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same strength that had carried her through decades of invisibility. To her surprise, she found she didn't hate Robert. She pitied him. He had thrown away the one thing money couldn't buy, unconditional love. And in doing so, he had lost far more than she ever had. In the weeks that followed, the story spread. An amateur video from the gala went viral, and suddenly Dorothy Wilson was no longer invisible. Reporters called, wanting her story. Talk shows invited her to appear. Book publishers offered contracts. Dorothy declined them all. Her story was her own, not a commodity to be consumed by a public hungry for inspiration. Instead, she expanded her foundation's work, using her unexpected platform to advocate for domestic workers' rights. She spoke at community centers, churches, and schools about dignity, resilience, and the power of seeing people, truly seeing them, regardless of their job title or bank account. Robert tried to reconcile. He appeared at her door one rainy evening, soaked and sobbing, begging for forgiveness. Dorothy listened to his apologies with compassion, but without illusion. The damage had been done, not in a single moment of rejection, but through years of taking without giving, of seeing without appreciating, of loving conditionally. "I forgive you," she told him honestly. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean returning to how things were." "What does it mean then?" he asked, his voice small. Dorothy considered the question carefully. "It means we both have the chance to become better, to build something new based on truth, not obligation." She didn't invite him in that night, but she did agree to meet for coffee the following week. It was a small step, the beginning of a journey neither of them could predict. Dorothy had no illusions about perfect reconciliations or fairy tale endings. Real healing, like real love, took time and work. What mattered was that, for the first time in her life, Dorothy was moving forward on her own terms. Her worth was no longer determined by what she could give or do for others. She had claimed her right to be seen, to be valued, to take up space in the world. On quiet evenings, sitting by the window of her lakefront home, Dorothy often reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. The pain and the joy, the sacrifices and the rewards, the invisible woman who had finally stepped into the light. She felt not bitter but grateful, not for the rejection that had set her free, but for the strength she had discovered within herself. And sometimes, as the sun set over Lake Michigan, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson, Dorothy would play Moonlight Sonata on her piano, her fingers moving across the keys with growing confidence. The music would fill the rooms of her home, a home that was truly hers, and she would smile knowing that it was never too late to begin again. Have you ever known someone who was treated as invisible until their worth was suddenly discovered? How did they respond to this transformation? The foundation Dorothy had established was thriving, supporting dozens of domestic workers through education programs, healthcare initiatives, and legal advocacy. Each success story, a housekeeper earning her GED, a home health aide accessing needed medical care, a nanny winning a wage theft case, filled Dorothy with a sense of purpose that no material wealth could match. But the greatest change was within herself, the quiet confidence she carried, the peace she had found, the knowledge that her life was finally her own. What would Mrs. Harrington think of how she had used her gift? Dorothy liked to believe she would approve, not of the lakefront home or the beautiful clothes, but of the work Dorothy was doing, the lives she was changing, the system she was challenging. She had taken an act of personal kindness and transformed it into a movement, small but growing, focused on those society found easiest to ignore. Robert continued to struggle, with his marriage, with his conscience, with the truth of his origins. Their relationship remained complicated, a delicate dance of tentative connection and necessary boundaries. Some wounds were too deep to fully heal, some patterns too ingrained to easily break. But they were trying, and in that effort, Dorothy found hope. 1 year to the day after she had been forced from her home, Dorothy hosted a gathering at her lakefront house. Not a lavish party with Chicago's elite, but a warm, joyful celebration with the people who mattered most to her now, friends from the community center, students from her piano class, families supported by her foundation. People who saw her, not for what she could give them, but for who she truly was. As evening fell, Dorothy stepped out onto her terrace overlooking the lake. The sky was ablaze with color, the water reflecting the fiery sunset. She breathed deeply, gratitude washing over her for this moment, this life, this unexpected journey. A voice spoke beside her, startling her from her reverie. "You did good, Mom." Robert stood at the railing, his eyes on the horizon. "Better than good. You built something beautiful from something ugly." Dorothy studied her son's profile, noting the new lines around his eyes, the humility that had replaced his arrogance. He was learning slowly, painfully, but learning nonetheless. "We all have that choice," she said quietly. "Every day." Robert nodded, understanding the lesson that had come at such high cost. They stood together in companionable silence, watching. The sun slipped below the horizon, the past receding with it. Inside, laughter and music spilled from open windows. Dorothy's guests were dancing, celebrating, living fully in the moment. She smiled, thinking of how far she had come from that rainy day with a pink slip in her hand and despair in her heart. The world hadn't changed. It still overlooked those it deemed unimportant, still valued wealth over worth, still mistook service for subservience. But Dorothy had changed. She had reclaimed her dignity, her voice, her power. And in doing so, she had created ripples that were slowly, steadily expanding outward, touching other lives, inspiring other transformations. That, she decided, was the true inheritance Mrs. Harrington had left her. Not the millions in her bank account, but the opportunity to become visible, to herself first, and then to the world, to stand in her full humanity and declare, "I am here. I matter. I always did. You are amazing." If you genuinely enjoyed this story, please leave a like and subscribe. It's a great feedback for me. If it made you feel seen, heard, or simply reminded you that change is still possible, share it with someone who needs a little hope today. See you.